Hey guys, this week we're going to focus on the start of the Civil War and some of the advantages and kind of technology that the Civil War brings on. Today we're going to focus on kind of the way that it begins. Now, as you're listening to this, make sure that you're following along. Make sure you also have the document open, the lecture open of your own. And there are some questions in here that you're going to answer on your copy and then submit. You also have 5 vocabulary terms to finish by the end of this week as well. In addition, Wednesday we're going to do a video conference, so if you can be there for that, it's optional, but you don't have to, but it'd be cool to see you guys there. So let's go and get started here. So the war begins officially in 1861, but there's a couple of events starting in the 1850s that lead to this conflict, and we see here in the left-hand side, this is the Union or the North, the group that's kind of fighting against the idea of slavery, and on the right-hand side we have the Confederacy fighting to protect and secure slavery. Now, as a recap of a lot of things that we've done, a lot of these different events led to this Civil War, this continued sectionalism or division in the country, and we learned about a whole bunch of these over the last couple of weeks, so we're not going to go through all of them. But some of them were ideas of manifest destiny, how we're trying to prevent slavery from expanding west, so we made all these different compromises, which in a lot of ways created confusion and conflict, created a decision in the Supreme Court that was kind of controversial. You also had sectionalism influences like Underground Railroad, where the slaves were escaping and Northerners were helping. You had speeches by Frederick Douglass and James Henry Hammond that we looked at, and kind of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and kind of all these influences making the country divide more and more and more. But there are a couple of events that really were kind of the straws that broke the camel's back that really started this war. And it starts with a man named John Brown. Now, we've seen this guy before. He was in Kansas in the Bleeding Kansas event where he attacked those pro-slavery supporters at Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas that kind of spurred the Bleeding Kansas mini-civil war that took place there. Well, now he's back at it. And in October of 1854, John Brown leads about 18 men, some of them his own children, some of them former slaves. But he leads these men and attacks a U.S. military, essentially a fort, a weapons base, at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now, his hope was that if he captured this fort, he'd have weapons and he could arm the local slaves in the area. And by arming them with weapons, they would start their own slave rebellion, which would then lead to, in his mind, the end of slavery. It's an absolute failure. The slaves do not rise up with him. Very few join him. And he ends up being captured by the military. One of the prime people that capture him is General Lee, who will be the military leader of the South in the war. But he captures him, and at his trial, he essentially makes this claim that God had given him this right or this message to use, as he says, to use the sword and end the cruelty of slavery. Well, nobody really supported his justification, and John Brown will eventually be hanged for his actions, along with his sons and his followers. Now, in history, John Brown is a controversial man. Most of our history textbooks portray him as what we call a martyr, somebody who died for a great cause and should be praised for what he was trying to accomplish. He was trying to end slavery. He was using force to end slavery, and he had a great cause, and so a lot of people see him as a martyr. Others see him as kind of what we call in modern day terms, a terrorist, where he was attacking U.S. citizens, U.S. soldiers. He was killing U.S. soldiers, U.S. citizens, for a cause that maybe was a good cause, but he did not choose the right actions. And so I leave you with that question based off just a little bit of information that you have there, is what do you think? Is he a terrorist or a martyr? You'll write your answer into your own sheet and turn that in. Now, you'll have a couple of those. You'll see them. You can just click in these boxes on your copy, type your answer. You can turn that in later. In addition to John Brown, you have the rise of the Republican Party. In 1850, the Republican Party kind of comes into its existence, and its existence comes because of the failures of the Whig Party. Now, the Whig Party, pretty closely associated with the Republican Party of that time, was a group that was anti-slavery, the Whigs were. But they were not wanting to abolish slavery in the country. They just wanted to prevent the expansion of slavery. So a lot of more radical Whigs and radical Democrats even, who wanted slavery to end, were struggling with the Whig Party. And so they disbanded the Whig Party, they created the Republican Party, and the major goal of the Republican Party was to end slavery in the nation. And that was kind of their focus at the beginning. And the most famous Republican of that time was going to be Abraham Lincoln. Now you're going to notice there's a question down here. Make sure that you answer that on your own. Now the election of Abraham Lincoln is in a lot of ways what really sets all of this war in motion. Now in 1860, Abraham Lincoln will be elected the President of the United States of America. And we can see on the map over here, he wins pretty handedly, really just by winning in the North. He does not win in the South in Breckinridge. That's the Southern Democrat who's going to win down there. His main opponent, Stephen Douglas, is going to win there in Missouri. And Bell is going to be kind of the deciding factor here. Bell is going to steal these 3 states through here, right? And these 3 states are what we, at the time, were kind of swing states. And they had a lot of support for the North, they had a lot of support for the South, and Bell will win there. Unfortunately, Bell does, because then Lincoln ends up winning enough electoral votes, and he becomes the President of the United States. Now, Lincoln gains his fame at this time because he was pretty unknown as a politician, having just served in the House of Representatives for a short period of time. He becomes famous for his Douglas-Lincoln debates, or Lincoln-Douglas debates, where he debated with Stephen Douglas multiple times up here in these northern states. And what we kind of see today in the debate style that we see on TV, where a narrator or a moderator asks a question, and as they ask that question, you have the 2 politicians debating and arguing with each other. And that's where he gains his fame. Now, before he even becomes president, you had these individuals in the South called fire eaters, who were pro-slavery extremists. And they threatened that if Lincoln became president, they would secede from the country. And secede means to break away or to leave. Well, when Lincoln is elected president in 1860, in that November of 1860, the Southerners made good on their promise, and they begin to break away from the country. Now, it's important to note, though, that Lincoln, when he is elected for president, it does actually never says he's going to end slavery. He says something else, which we're going to see here in just a second. But we can see here on the map, as we're looking here, you start to see South Carolina is the first state to secede, followed by all these other red states. These are kind of the deep South states. And then eventually by North Carolina, or Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, they're going to break away. These states that are gray, kind of a brown color, besides Missouri, these are going to be your border states. They're states that support both the idea of the North and ideas of the South. And they don't really break away. They're going to be important for Lincoln here in just a second. Now, the question that always arises with this is, was the South even allowed to do this? Could they break away? Did they have, as states, the power to do so? And in a lot of ways, the way that we look at it now today is no, they didn't. But at the time, a lot of them thought that they did. And the reason that the Southerners thought that they had the right to break away is because they thought that the Constitution was a voluntary contract, that they volunteered to join it, and when they volunteered to join it, they could therefore leave it if they wished. And they cite a lot of arguments or a lot of reasons for this. The first 2 are the 9th and the 10th Amendments. Remember from second quarter, the 9th Amendment gave power to the people that are not listed in the Constitution. And the 10th Amendment gave powers to the states to make rules and laws that are not listed in the Constitution. Well, since the idea of secession is never actually listed or talked about in the Constitution, those loose interpretists of the South believed that they had the right to break away since they felt like the Constitution and the country were no longer serving them. They also cited this idea of Locke's social contract theory, which we talked about in the first quarter, which is this idea that when people enter into a society or enter into a new group, that they're willing to change or sacrifice some of their own freedoms or beliefs or practices to have a safe and a secure and a better life within the group. A lot of these Southerners start to believe that their life is not better under this Constitution and that they've been giving up rights for not having a better life, and therefore thought, hey, it's time for us to break away. And so the Southern states make these claims saying, hey, we have the right, we have state power to do so. And you see this threat sometimes even today. Texas threatens it once in a while when they're not really getting their way sometimes. And they've never done it, but they threaten the same idea. There's really still even today nothing written in the Constitution that prevents states from seceding. And you notice you have a question here that you'll want to answer on your sheet as well. Now, as these states break away, they form what we call the Confederate States of America, or the CSA. Now, within this Confederate States of America, they form their own constitution based pretty close and pretty similar to the United States Constitution. But some of the big things that they change or add in there is that they guarantee the right of slavery as an institution, that people have the right to own slaves. They also say that the government in the South would not prevent its spread of slavery across the country. And it also opened up the slave trade. Now you're going to notice I'm referring to the CSA as a country. It's never really been identified as a country in history, but they themselves in the South felt like they were their own independent country. Within that constitution, it says no law impairing or denying the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed. So you can kind of start to see how they feel like, hey, slavery is a huge issue for us. They're going to make no laws that are preventing it. It's going to be kind of a focal point of that constitution. They do end up selecting Jefferson Davis as the president of the South. He was a Mississippi congressman. And by the end of 1861, there are 13 states that have officially joined the CSA. Well, while the CSA forms, or really even, after the CSA forms, Lincoln is finally brought in as president. Now, he wins his election in November of 1860, but he does not become president until February of 1861. It's a natural process. We see it even today. Well, when Lincoln finally arrives in D.C., the CSA is already formed and the nation is divided. And as he's giving his inaugural address, his speech, he focuses on 2 points. Number one, he affirms that federal power outweighs state powers, that the federal government has their rules and their laws outweigh what the state's rules and laws are. We see that today. He also makes this focus that as he claims, he would not end slavery. And he says he has no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it already exists. And so we see, was the South maybe a little bit ambitious in breaking away? Was Lincoln really never intending to end slavery, and the South breaking away just made him act out in retaliation? That's one theory that historians have. The other one is this. I told you these brown states are super important. They all have slaves. None of them broke away. And if Lincoln had come out and said that he was going to end slavery, would those states have broken away and joined the South, making it more difficult for the North to win? And that's what a lot of historians believe, is that he simply said that to make sure that these states did not break away from the country, those border states. Now, the war, Lincoln is kind of the driving force, the driving factor that causes the South to break away. But there's a particular event that starts the war, and it is the attack on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is located in South Carolina. We can kind of see it on the arrow down here. Here's Fort Sumter. And it is a Union military arms base. Now, as Lincoln became president, a lot of Southerners began to take Union military bases, or U.S. bases that were located in the South, that couldn't really do anything to stop it because they were behind Southern lines. And most of them were taken over fairly peacefully. That is not the case, however, at Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter, important, right? It's on the coastline here. The Union wanted to hold on to this fort so that way they had a base down here in the South and they could easily attack or defend if they needed to. And the Southerners knew that. As a result, Lincoln promises to supply and rearm that fort anytime they needed supplies to maintain it. However, the Southerners on April 12th of 1861 begin to bombard the fort with cannon fire. We can see that in the picture down here to the left-hand side. Well, twice the fort is tried to be resupplied by a Union ship that was going to bring the supplies in. However, twice the Confederates are able to force that ship back, and it fails. Well, as a result, there's not enough supplies for Fort Sumter to carry on. And 2 days later, on April 14th of 1861, Sumter is surrendered to the Confederates, and the war has officially begun. And now we're going to look at how was the war kind of an advantage to which side, and what new technologies were invented, because it's incredible what was created, incredible and devastating, what was created and used in this war. Now, this is your final question to kind of finish up. You'll want to turn in those documents once you're done. You want to also make sure that you get the vocabulary done this week. And then you do have an assignment on Wednesday, and then an assignment that'll take you on to Thursday and Friday. Remember, assignments need to be turned in by Sunday at the latest, or else they are marked late after that time. Wednesday, there is a meeting, a virtual meeting. You're welcome to come join. You'll see the link in the way to join that on Google Classroom. So we hope to see you there.